This is how much smoke a single ordinary campfire produces. That's enough to fill a giant hot air balloon. And burning just one car tire releases roughly the same amount. Now multiply that by 1,000,000. That's what the world's largest tire dump looks like when it burns. So how big would a balloon have to be to hold all that smoke? In Kuwait, near Sulabia, more than 50 million tires were dumped in one spot for over 2 decades. 50 million. The site was so massive you could literally see it from space. An unobtrusive reminder to do that thing under the video. And tires, by the way, are a nightmare waste product. They're huge, they don't biodegrade, and they're packed with chemicals that make environmentalists nervous. So when recycling efforts stall, we end up with tire graveyards like this. Endless black rows, perfectly geometric, as if someone tried to build an entire city out of rubber. And yes, the global situation stopped being, just a bit of buildup a long time ago. On top of that, each tire contains roughly 2 gallons of oil, which means 50 million tires holds the equivalent of 100 million gallons of oil. And perhaps the scariest part is that the tire dump fires have erupted before, sending towering plumes of smoke into the sky. From 2012 to 2020, 3 major fires broke out. Heat, dry air, that's all it took for the towering plumes of smoke to carry a toxic mix into the sky. All those chemical compounds later settled over the nearby suburbs, and people living just 4.3 miles away knew all too well what that acrid black smoke felt like when it stung their eyes and throats. Naturally, everyone was worried, with good reason, because, hold on, how about this number? In 1990, a similar dump in Canada burned through 14 million tires. Now compare that. 50 million tires is several times more. The emissions from burning tires are a nightmare of their own. They're 16 times more toxic than smoke from a regular wood-burning fireplace and 13,000 times more toxic than emissions from coal-fired municipal plants. At this point, you understand why residents saw this landfill as a ticking time bomb. Now imagine all 50 million tires going up at once. The smoke would blanket an entire city. If you picture the volume as a sphere, it would be enough to fill a ball roughly 1.2 miles across. A massive black sphere of smoke. Almost surreal. But it gives you a sense of the scale. Because of dangers like this, tires were never just dumped into a giant heap. They were stored in separate sections with fire breaks in between. A sort of makeshift barrier so the flames wouldn't race across the whole site in minutes. Otherwise, it really would have been an environmental catastrophe. The dump is gone today, but in its place stands something much larger and far more intriguing. Every year, internet juggernaut Amazon writes off and destroys millions of products. Brand new items, untouched, still in their packaging, and that's not an exaggeration. Real footage shows the sheer scale of the waste, and honestly, it's hard to stomach. And remember, this is just one of 24 fulfillment centers in the UK. Feeling uneasy already? Hold on, there's more. Hidden camera recordings from the Dunfermline warehouse reveal what's happening inside. Smart TVs, laptops, drones, hair dryers, high-end headphones, new books, sealed packs of face masks, all neatly stacked in boxes marked with a simple label, destroy. Just like that, these are items that weren't sold or were returned by customers. Amazon says the site also has its own recycling facility and insists that no item is sent to landfill in the UK. Maybe so, but then a former employee who chose to remain anonymous came forward. He said their weekly quota was around 130,000 items slated for destruction. Then he listed what typically went into the pile: Dyson fans, Hoover vacuums, MacBooks, iPads, all in great condition. Sometimes there were tens of thousands of new masks, still wrapped in shrink wrap. According to him, roughly half the items had never been opened at all. The rest were returned in like-new condition. Why would anyone destroy hundreds of thousands of perfectly good products? The answer lies in Amazon's business model. Sellers pay to keep their inventory in Amazon warehouses, and the longer those items sit there, the higher the storage fees climb. Eventually, keeping the stock becomes so expensive that it's literally cheaper to destroy it than to continue paying for storage. Especially if the goods were imported, sending them back costs even more. And remember, this is just one country. A French documentary claims that Amazon destroyed more than 3 million items in France alone in a single year. The company says it partners with charities in the UK and the US, yet it doesn't deny that a massive share of its stock still ends up in landfills or is simply destroyed. As for a global number, there isn't one. Amazon just doesn't publish it. Everything we know comes from journalists' investigations. And if the UK alone sees thousands of products trashed, imagine the numbers for the US. There, the total might already be in the millions or even the hundreds of millions. If all those destroyed goods were piled in one place, you could see the mound from space. But you know what? Nature can do that too. Adelie penguins are so small you can't really spot the birds from space, but what they leave behind? That's easy to see. So easy, in fact, that their traces reveal where they live, what they eat, and even how many of them there are. Yes, we literally count penguins by their guano. Many researchers still travel to Antarctica to study the colonies in person, but it's a hard place to reach. Bitter cold, storms, long months of darkness, short summers, and sometimes no one even knows where to look for these birds. So scientists turn to satellites and start scanning the coastline from orbit. They use a computer algorithm that combs through Landsat satellite images, searching for specific shades of red and pink, the colors of penguin guano. Adelie penguins nest in huge colonies and return to the same spots generation after generation. Over time, their droppings pile up on rocks and ice in such thick layers that they appear from space as brightly colored patches. Last year, those very patches helped scientists discover new emperor penguin colonies, 4 completely new groups no one knew existed, plus another one that was thought to be gone for good. Turns out penguin bathroom habits are a real asset to science. And believe it or not, piles of guano can actually cool Antarctica. Wait, what? The ammonia released from the droppings improves cloud cover along the coast, which means less sunlight reaches the ground, and temperatures drop. Antarctica is basically a perfect natural lab, almost no human pollution, hardly any plants, and virtually no other sources of cloud-forming gases. So penguins end up being one of the region's main suppliers of atmospheric ammonia. So next time you watch a documentary about Antarctica and see a gorgeous shot of clouds, remember, they're probably there because someone was very, very busy pooping. Still, nature doesn't need giant piles of droppings to flex its power. Sometimes insects are enough, and insects are much worse. Albert's swarm of 1875 was the stuff of nightmares. It was recorded by Dr. Albert Child, who estimated that roughly 12.5 trillion Rocky Mountain locusts were swirling through the sky. The only silver lining is that this species is now extinct. But back then, that insect cloud blanketed about 198,000 square miles of the Midwestern USA. That's an area the size of several states combined. And even if Child's counting method wasn't perfect, it happens, the fact remains. Locusts can form swarms that are among the largest concentrations of animals ever recorded on Earth. From 2019 through 2022, outbreaks in East Africa and parts of Asia reached up to 70 billion insects, and that still counts as normal. Back in August of 1875, the people of the American West faced a disaster of unimaginable scale. A dense living wall swept over Colorado, so thick with wings that it blotted out the sky. Fields vanished in minutes, and dusty streets turned into a crunching, shifting carpet of bodies. Gross. And even though locusts aren't thunderstorms, hail, or tornadoes, the U.S. National Weather Service still listed the 1875 swarm as one of that August's major weather events. Yes, it really was that serious. To give you a sense of the scale, in 1875, Colorado's locust invasions were considered as devastating as California's wildfires in 2020. That's how powerful that living cloud was, devouring everything in its path. And the cherry on top is how these insects gather into swarms. When the population grows too dense, locusts smell each other's droppings and feel constant touches on the tiny hairs on their legs. For them, that's the cue. Time to take off and migrate. Nature? Seriously, why? The locust invasion of 1875 became the first time the U.S. federal government officially stepped in to help its citizens as if it were a natural disaster. The Army had to distribute food across the entire West, so people wouldn't literally starve during the winter of 1875 to 1876. Yes, it was that bad. Using telegraphed reports from surrounding towns, Albert Child estimated the swarm as covering nearly a third of Alaska. Or, put another way, an area equal to the combined landmass of the 13 smallest U.S. states. In scale, it was an invasion the size of California and Maine put together. Honestly, even with a visual in front of me, I can barely wrap my head around it. As for the sound, I don't even want to imagine it. The buzzing and grinding of billions of mandibles merged into a shrieking wave rolling over the land? as if someone had switched on a massive rusty generator right above your head, running non-stop. But the noise wasn't even the worst part. This was the late 19th century, a world without grocery stores. You'd watch your entire food supply vanish before your eyes. First, the crops, then the root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, turnips. Nothing was spared. Try covering your garden with blankets to save something, they'd eat the blankets too. Fence posts, saddles. Locusts weren't picky in the slightest. They even ripped wool off sheep. And in the most frightening accounts, they tore clothing off people. Trains stalled on uphill grades because their wheels slipped on a greasy layer of crushed insects? God, what a nightmare. But why did this explosive population boom happen in the first place? I dug around and take a look at this photo. A mountain of bison skulls behind the man. By 1841, Americans had slaughtered 2 to 3 million bison for their hides. Once the bison were gone, the vegetation of the Great Plains changed. More grasses, shrubs, and plants sprang up, things no one was grazing anymore. Suddenly, there was way too much food, and the locusts began to breed like there's no tomorrow. They multiplied so fast that eventually they outgrew their own buffet. The grass was running out and, well, you can guess the rest. It's a pity no one ever found a real use for those locusts. Then again, a giant sky-darkening swarm of not-so-pleasant critters doesn't exactly inspire thoughts of recycling. Now, if only it had been mollusks instead of locusts. Not in the sense that mollusks should fly around and swallow up the American Midwest. No, hold on. I'll explain everything. On the British Virgin Islands, there's a humble little sea snail called the conch. It doesn't look like much, but in the local cuisine, it rivals lobster. And not just there, across the entire Caribbean, conch is a staple food. When people harvest these snails, they naturally separate the meat from the shell and toss the empty shells back into the water. They've been tossed back for so long that the piles eventually started rising above the surface, forming tiny artificial islands. The practice began with the indigenous peoples, then continued with European settlers. Old shells sank into the sand, new ones landed on top. Layer by layer, for nearly 8 centuries, some of the quietest and most beautiful trash heaps on the planet took shape. And that's just the beginning. In Senegal, these shell islands have grown so huge that people actually build villages right on them. Literally. Pédiath is one of those settlements. There, shells are everywhere. Shells crunch underfoot, used in local crafts, even mixed into the materials used for houses. And the surprising part is that it isn't harmful at all. Some researchers think these massive shell dumps help mollusks survive in places where they've otherwise nearly vanished due to overfishing. But there's a catch. Scattered shells don't attract new conches. Quite the opposite. If you spread shells over a wide area, live conches interpret it as danger and move away. But when empty shells are deposited neatly in one compact spot, it sends a signal of calm. Everything's fine, boys. No need for a mass evacuation. And that's just the local story. Look at the global picture and, wow, every year about 8 million tons of crab, shrimp, and lobster waste is produced, plus another 10 million tons from oysters, clams, scallops, and mussels. All of it is shell, mostly calcium carbonate, which breaks down so slowly it might as well never decompose at all. If you gathered every bit of shell waste produced throughout human history, it's almost impossible to imagine. You could easily build a full-fledged island. Honestly, probably a small continent. By the way, if you took every animal species on Earth and combined their total weight, who do you think would come out on top? Locusts? Thankfully, no. Whales? Elephants? Sure, that'd make sense. They're huge, but the right answer is ants. These tiny creatures, each weighing just 0.00003 to 0.00017 ounces, outweigh every other animal group. There are so many of them, scientists have spent years arguing over how many ants are actually out there. Only in 2022 did researchers, using mathematical models, finally land on a number that at least resembles the truth, roughly 20 quadrillion ants. 20 quadrillion. That's more than the number of stars in the Milky Way. And if you put all the ants on Earth on a giant scale, they'd weigh more than all wild birds and all wild animals combined. That's about 1/5 of total human biomass. Hard to believe when each ant is basically a speck of dust. Whether it's 0.00003 or 0.00017 ounces hardly matters. Yet as far back as 1994, Harvard professor Edward Wilson and German biologist Bert Holdobler suggested that the world's ants could weigh about as much as all humans. And here's the twist. Today we know their estimate was understated. Very understated. For a long time, everything came down to one problem. No one had the faintest idea how many ants lived on our planet. Some estimates claimed 10,000 trillion, while others insisted on 100 trillion. The gap was absolutely astronomical. Only recently has technology finally allowed us to get closer to the truth. And here's what scientists discovered. For every person on Earth, there are roughly 2.5 million ants. The analysis draws on 489 studies of ant populations from all over the world, from the tropics to the temperate regions. Ants thrive almost everywhere: forests, savannas, deserts. The only places they don't settle are the truly extreme ones: Antarctica, Iceland, Greenland, and a few tiny island nations. Not because ants dislike those places or think they're too small, they just haven't made it there yet. One of the researchers said the final data set was the product of an enormous effort by thousands of researchers. They gathered data from different regions, extrapolated population densities, and managed to estimate the total number and biomass of these creatures. And the result, there are far more ants than we ever imagined. And now we leap from the microscopic to the colossal, from minuscule ants to towering columns of fire. It all started in Kuwait, where hundreds of oil wells were set on fire. In a 2010 Time magazine feature, this story was ranked as the third largest environmental disaster in human history, right behind Chernobyl and Bhopal. And no, that's not an exaggeration. As Operation Desert Storm was drawing to a close, Kuwait had been liberated and the Iraqi army was practically shattered. Saddam Hussein refused to admit defeat. Instead, he delivered one more blow. Not to the military, but to Kuwait's environment and its oil infrastructure. He ordered his forces to blow up the country's oil wells, and just like that, the nation went up in flames. Nearly 700 wells turned into roaring fire pillars. A grim beginning to what many called the Black Death of the 20th century. At first, extinguishing them was almost impossible. Fighting was still raging, it was far too dangerous to send in firefighters, and then another problem surfaced. Many of the wells were surrounded by landmines. Crews had to clear the mines first before they could even think of getting close to the fires. Meanwhile, Kuwait was losing around 5 million barrels of oil every single day. In the end, private firefighting teams managed to put out the inferno. Total cost, roughly $1.5 billion. The smoke plumes were so massive they were visible even in satellite images. And although emergency crews contained the disaster far faster than anyone predicted, the inferno dragged on for 10 long months. Almost a full year. NASA wrote that sand and gravel mixed with crude oil and soot had turned into a solid crust of black tar that covered roughly 5% of the entire country. Animals were dying by the dozens. An oily mist seeped into their lungs, turning the tissue pitch black. Imagine a country where, for 10 months, everything was turned upside down. Daytime felt like night because of the smoke. Nighttime was blazing bright from the glow of burning oil fountains. Everything around was on fire, and the roar was so intense the ground trembled. Dr. Samira Omar Asim from the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research said the sound of gushing oil and the fury of the flames still echo in her memory. She recalled seeing a dead goat sink into a lake of black oil with her own eyes. And that's not a sight I'd ever want to witness myself. The oil wells burned unchecked, and no one could do a thing about it. A column of smoke stretched for 857 miles, like a cloud swallowing half a continent. Not a locust swarm, sure, but horrifying all the same. So much crude oil spilled that the number itself feels like a disaster. 11 million barrels poured straight into the Persian Gulf. They left a slick roughly 9 miles long, and the land wasn't any better. The desert turned into a lunar landscape dotted with about 300 oil lakes. Black, viscous, toxic pools that would poison the soil for years to come. One eyewitness recalled walking across the scorched ground and stumbling upon the remnants of a human skull, a small charred fragment with burned bones nearby. Someone had simply been in the wrong place when a bomb detonated and everything ignited. Starving horses wandered around the ruins. The atmosphere was so bleak it felt less like Earth and more like some burned-out world. 3 decades have passed. You'd think time would heal things, but apparently not this time. More than 90% of the contaminated, untreated soil is still exposed, continuing to interact with the environment. Many areas remain off-limits because of unexploded ordnance left behind in the sand after the Iraqi forces retreated. It's practically a maze of mines buried under a layer of oil. Field research photos from 2012 to 2019 reveal the scale of the damage and the many forms that damage can take. In some places, you see black crusts, in others, sticky pools. In certain boreholes, the contamination reaches down as far as 13 feet, as if the oil had tried to seep deeper, escape into the sand, and ended up leaving nothing but a trail of damage. Anyway, let's switch to something normal, natural, yet still massive. Sometimes size really does matter, especially if you're a whale. Hey, I meant its heart. The heart of a blue whale is pure biological insanity. The largest heart of any living animal today is roughly the size of a small car and weighs about 948 pounds, nearly half a ton of pure, hard-working muscle. And like all mammals, it has 4 chambers, only big enough that you could literally walk inside them. This single organ has to pump blood through a creature as long as 2 school buses. Its aorta, the main artery, has walls up to 6 inches thick. That's not a vessel, that's a full-on industrial cable built to withstand the pressures of an animal that dives deeper than most recreational submarines. When a blue whale descends, its heart rate drops to 4 beats per minute, just 4. That slow rhythm lets it stay underwater longer and reduces the risk of decompression sickness, the condition that hits when the body shifts too fast from high to low pressure. The whale just shifts into low gear. The heartbeat slows, circulation eases, nitrogen absorption decreases, and its body handles those pressure swings like it's just another casual dive. A blue whale's heartbeat is so powerful you can hear it from 1.8 miles away. With every beat, about 60 gallons of blood surge through its body. That's basically the equivalent of your heart pumping an entire bathtub of water in one go. In New Zealand, a company called Human Dynamo Workshop built a giant heart model for the Ocean Institute. And yes, visitors can actually climb inside it. Yes, right inside it. The tubes running through the model are roughly the size of the tunnels you'd find in kids' playgrounds, except here they mimic the real blood vessels of a marine giant. And yet, the heart makes up only about 1% of the whale's total body mass. It's partially nothing, but even so, it's still the largest heart on the planet. To put it in perspective, a blue whale's heart is roughly 640 times heavier than a human's. A biologist said in one video that it took 4 people to remove the heart from the chest cavity of a dead whale. And honestly, that's not surprising, because everything about blue whales is colossal. Even their tongues weigh more than an elephant, so you can imagine the rest. You owe me a like. See you later.